On January 13, 1963, the pianist Sonny Clark died of a heroin overdose in a shooting gallery somewhere in New York City. He was 31. The previous two nights, January 11th and 12th, 1963, he had played piano at Junior's Bar on the ground floor of the Alvin Hotel on the northwest corner of 52nd and Broadway. The next thing we know with certainty is that a noted jazz patron called Clark's older sister in Pittsburgh to inform her of her brother's death. She said she would pay to have the body transported to his hometown and that she'd pay for a proper funeral. What is not known, however, is if the body in the New York City morgue was actually Clark's. Witnesses in both New York and Pittsburgh believed it wasn't. They thought it didn't look like Sonny. Some suspected a conspiracy with the drug underground with which Clark was entangled, but as African Americans in a white system, they were hesitant to discuss the matter. It was probably a simple case of carelessness at the morgue, something not uncommon with street deaths at the time, particularly when the corpses were African American. Today, there's a gravestone with Clark's name on it in the rural hills outside Pittsburgh, where a body shipped from New York was buried in mid-January of that year. How painful it must have been to stay silent and let a funeral proceed, not knowing for sure where Sonny's body was. His may be one of the thousands of unidentified ones buried in Potter's Field on New York's Hart Island, where Sonny himself dug graves years earlier, while incarcerated at Rikers Island on drug charges. Like Fats Navarro and Charlie Parker before him, Sonny Clark's life was short, but it burned with musical intensity. Influenced deeply by Bud Powell, Clark nonetheless developed an intricate and hard-swinging harmonic sensibility that was full of nuance and detail. Regarded as the quintessential hard bop pianist, Clark never got his due before he passed away in 1963, despite the fact that it can be argued that he never played a bad recording date either as a sideman or as a leader. Known mainly for 7 records on the Blue Note label with a host of players, including such luminaries as John Coltrane, Art Farmer, Donald Byrd, Jackie McLean, and Philly Joe Jones, Clark actually made his recording debut with Teddy Charles and Wardell Gray, but left soon after to join Buddy DeFranco. His work with the great clarinetist has been documented in full in a mosaic set that is now sadly out of print. Clark also backed Dinah Washington, Serge Chaloff, and Sonny Criss before assuming his role as a leader in 1957. Clark's Cool Struttin' is regarded as a classic, but each recording he led on Blue Note qualifies as a classic, including his final one, Sonny's Crib, with John Coltrane. And though commercial success always eluded him, he was in demand as a sideman and played dozens of recordings, including Tina Brooks' Minor Move. Luckily, Clark's contribution is well documented. He has achieved far more critical, musical, and popular acclaim than he ever did in life. Clark was born on July 21, 1931, in Hermione No. 2, Pennsylvania, a coal patch a few miles from the bigger company town of Hermione. No. 2 refers to the second mine shaft of the Ocean Coal Company, and about 25 miles east of Pittsburgh. On August 2nd of that same year, his father, Emory Clark, a miner, died of a lingering illness of tuberculosis. Sonny was the youngest of 8 kids and was raised by his mother and his older siblings. The town had a school, a few places of worship, including a black church, a beer garden, and a company store. There was also a black-owned hotel that hosted some of the most popular weekend dances in the region for African Americans. A small boy and a small man as well, 5'5", 130 pounds full grown, Sonny began playing piano in the hotel while in elementary school. People marveled at his playing, and he was written up in the famous black newspaper, the Pittsburgh Courier. His oldest brother, Emory, carried Sonny home on his shoulders after he won a talent show. While visiting an aunt in California at age 20, Clark decided to stay, and began working with musician Wardell Gray. Clark went to San Francisco with Oscar Pettiford, and after a couple months was working with clarinetist Buddy DeFranco in 1953. He toured the United States and Europe with DeFranco until January 1956, when he joined the Lighthouse All-Stars, led by Howard Rumsey. Wishing to return to the East Coast, Clark served as accompanist for singer Dinah Washington in February 1957 in order to relocate to New York City. While in New York, he was often requested as a sideman by many musicians, partly because of his rhythmic comping. He frequently recorded for Blue Note Records as one of their house musicians, playing as a sideman with many hard bop players, including Donald Byrd, John Coltrane, Dexter Gordon, Art Farmer, Philly Joe Jones, Jackie McLean, and Hank Mobley. He also recorded sessions with Charles Mingus, Sonny Rollins, Billie Holiday, Stanley Turrentine, and Lee Morgan. You can hear Sonny playing the piano on numerous classic albums like Dexter Gordon's Go, Jackie McLean's Jackie's Bag, and his own masterpiece, Cool Struttin'. You can hear him playing live on a few concert recordings, like Oakland 1955 and Art Pepper's Holiday Flight. He's the face you see in still photos but can't see on film. A brilliant jazz pianist who was in demand during the 1950s and 60s on both the West and East Coasts. The only known footage of him playing came from a 1956 TV show called Stars of Jazz, but the film seems to have been destroyed when ABC recorded over many of its reels in order to save money. Though Clark has garnered a cult following over the years, especially on the heels of musician John Zorn's 1980s tribute to him, his name is not often found in histories of jazz piano. Music critic Robert Palmer wrote of the particular special aura that hovers around Mr. Clark's music, an aura that musicians recognize, but that critics have found difficult to define. Johnny Griffin has said, "Sonny used Bud Powell's basis for power and attack on the piano, but he had finesse and an exceptional technique. He was quite unique." Like many other musicians of his generation, Clark struggled with drug addiction. In his memoir, Raise Up Off Me, Pianist, Hampton Hawes describes himself and Clark living and hustling for drugs together in New York in the late 1950s, where they acquired the nickname the Gold Dust Twins. During that time, Clark had practically been the house pianist for the Blue Note label, appearing on numerous hard bop classics as both a leader and a sideman. Between the spring of 1959 and the autumn of 1961, though, Clark made only 5 studio dates, none of them for Blue Note. His addiction left a gap in his recording career. In late 1961, Clark suddenly returned with what would prove to be a year-long burst of activity, the final stage of his evolution as a modern jazz master. Sonny Clark passed away in January of 1963 at the age of 31, after being hospitalized for an infection in his leg. Not long after he was released from the hospital, he died of a heart attack on January 13th. The New York Amsterdam News attributed his death to narcotics poisoning. Years later, David Rosenthal would write that Clark died of an overdose at a New York club. The club's owners reportedly moved his body to a private apartment before calling the police to avoid bad publicity. A benefit concert was held at the Village Gate Jazz Club in Greenwich Village 2 weeks later, featuring Thelonious Monk, Jackie McLean, and many other participants in the New York jazz scene. Pianist Bill Evans, who shared Clark's drug affliction, wrote a musical tribute titled NYC's No Lark, an anagram of the name Sonny Clark. Clark left behind a musical legacy that has been, for the most part, appreciated only by jazz aficionados and fellow musicians. Trumpeter Art Farmer was one such admirer. "A primary quality in Sonny's playing is that there's no strain in it," he once said. "Some people sound like they're trying to swing. Sonny just flows naturally along." We don't know how Sonny Clark might have evolved musically had he lived longer, But what's clear is that in the last year of his life, his talent had continued to flower. Sonny Clark has come of age, jazz writer Ira Gitler proclaimed in his liner notes to the pianist's final album. Clark himself once said, "Your soul is your conception, and you begin to have it in your playing. The way you strike a note, the sound you get, and your phrasing comes out of you, yourself, and no one else." In that sense, Sonny Clark had certainly arrived, and then he was gone. This is Robert from One Track Jazz. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe.